James Holmes, Adam Lanza, Daniel Petrick, Devin Moore. Maybe a couple of these names stand out to you. But what do these names have in common? They're all murderers whose murders were linked to the usage of violent video games. James Holmes went on a rampage in a Colorado movie theater and was a frequent player of World of Warcraft. Adam Lanza, the shooter of Sandy Hook Elementary. It was said his existence largely involved playing violent computer games. Daniel Petrick killed his parents when they banned him from Halo 3 after becoming obsessed with it. He would play 18 hours a day and said he did it to get even. Although some would blame poor parenting for the behavior of some children, poor parenting is not the only problem. Violent video games can have a major effect on a child's behavior because excessive use can alter the brain. Dr. Vincent Matthews and his colleagues at Indiana University, who have long studied media violence, looked at what happened in the brain of 28 students who were randomly assigned to play either a violent first-person shooter game or a non-violent game every day for 1 week. None of these participants had previous gaming experience. Researchers found that those who played the violent video games showed less activity in areas that involved emotions, attention, and inhibition of our impulses. Matthews stated, "Behavioral studies have shown an increase in aggressive behavior after violent video games, and what we show is the physiological explanation for what the behavioral studies are showing. We're showing that there are changes in brain function that are likely related to that behavior." And these kids only had to play these video games for a week, and they already had changes in their brain. Imagine if these kids had months and years of being exposed to this and playing these games for hours and hours and hours every day during that period. We have these things in our brains called mirror neurons. Psychologist Darcia Narvaez states, "We know now that there are mirror neurons in the brain that are activated when one watches someone else take action. In effect, watching someone take action is like practicing it yourself. So when a child plays a video game where they can kill people begging for mercy or burn people alive, they're practicing being cruel." Mirror neurons are the reason we cry during sad movies. Not only do we feel the character's pain, but our minds are putting us in that situation. So when kids play these violent video games, their brains put them in that situation where they're killing. Being exposed to this will make the brain focus on only threats and reacting to those threats, rather than thinking with the more thoughtful parts of the brain. These video games also desensitize players to violence and rewards players for simulating violence, and can teach children that violence is an acceptable way in resolving conflict. Our brains love rewards. So whenever we do something and get rewarded, we're likely to do that same action over again. Just like in video games, players can get points for killing or robbing or whatever other violent act, and they get a reward for it. So then, during these games, that's what they keep doing because they're getting rewards. In young minds, it can be hard to separate fantasy from reality, especially with those mirror neurons we talked about. There's been a few cases where children went out and killed and said they learned it from playing video games. One example is a 8-year-old who killed his grandma after playing Grand Theft Auto. If you're unfamiliar with this game, it is a game that is associated with encouraging violence and awards points to players for killing people. He was playing this game minutes before he took a gun and shot his own grandma. According to videogames.procon.org, as many as 97% of kids ages 12 through 17 play video games, and more than half of the 50 top-selling video games contain violence. 97%. That is a high percentage. So even if you don't have video games in your home, your child's friends are more than likely to have these games. And these are the ages children are developing. So excessive use, especially during this time, can be detrimental to their brains. Yes, these cases that I've talked about are very extreme, but they still happened, and they still have been linked to video game usage. So what can parents do? The biggest thing they can do is monitor their children, know what games they're playing, and if they are playing games in their home, have their computer or their gaming system in a room where it's open, where you can monitor. Don't have it in their bedroom or office where they're all alone. Parents can talk to kids openly about the effects that violent video games can have. I think a huge thing that would be awesome is to get kids involved, whether that's in sports, in dance, in music, in, cooking lessons. Just find them a hobby that they love doing that keeps them occupied rather than playing these violent video games. I think another important thing is to know who the child's friends are. And if you need to, reach out to those parents and let them know that your child doesn't play these violent video games or that you only let them play for a certain amount of time. The child may not like that, but it's kind of important. I'm not saying that if your child is playing these video games, they're going to turn out to be some monster. But if it becomes excessive, that's when it's important to be aware. So educating yourselves on the effects video games can have, I think, is a huge, huge thing we can do. We need to be cautious and be educated on the effects before it's too late.